Federal prosecutions of white-collar crime receive less and less attention. But first, let's discuss what is white-collar crime. The Department of Justice classifies a wide variety of frauds as white-collar. But let's name a few. Of course, we're talking about antitrust, security fraud, tax fraud, identity theft, consumer fraud, healthcare fraud, federal programs fraud, just to name a few. In 1994, the Department of Justice brought about 11,000 cases throughout federal courts dealing with white collar. Now, by 2024, that number dropped to about 4,300. And now, going into 2025, we're about halfway through the year, the number is expected to drop under 4,000. In fact, now we're going to see about 3,800 cases filed by the Department of Justice. That is because under this administration, the white-collar crime is not a priority. In fact, the FBI agents are instructed to spend about a third of their time in their field offices investigating immigration-related offenses. But just because we're not seeing white-collar crime, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And as a defense lawyer, of course, I take a wide variety of cases, including white-collar crimes. And another interesting note, throughout the years, if we look back about 40 years back, most of the cases, 99% of them, are against individuals. Only 1% of white-collar crimes were brought against corporations. So today, we're going to shift gears a little bit. You're used to seeing this channel where we discuss the Fourth Amendment. Today, we're going to talk about fraud. And we're going to focus on the case to try to determine how do the guidelines look at the laws when we're dealing with fraud. Before we go on, I want to thank you for watching me here on YouTube. If you're new to the Law Stash channel, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening to the podcast version of this recording on Audible or Spotify, please give my podcast a 5-star rating. And finally, if you want to support this channel, consider going to lawstash.com and check out some of the merch, including the Do Not Arrest This Person t-shirts. Thanks for watching.
Quick message from Law Stash. Are you charged with a crime? Or do you want to know your rights if stopped by police? Watch California attorney Anton Vieltsin discuss legal cases from the Supreme Court, Ninth Circuit, and California state courts on the Law Stash YouTube page. Anton has handled hundreds of federal and state criminal cases, has an in-depth knowledge of the law, and has the best mustache ever. Subscribe to the Law Stash YouTube page. That's LAWSTACHE.
Today we're discussing United States versus Yaffa, a case from the Ninth Circuit that was published just last week, and it deals with securities fraud. And now that I'm making this video, I realize I forgot to put my suit jacket on. But don't worry, I own plenty of suits. I just forgot to put the jacket on for this video, so please forgive me, and let's move on and talk about the facts of the case. Joshua and Jamie Yaffa, along with a few other individuals, were involved in a classic pump and dump stock manipulation scheme. They were not the owners, but they involved themselves with the owners of a company called Global Whole Health Products. And this company purported to make medical kits in 2020 during the rise of COVID-19 pandemic. Now, regardless of what the company did, Joshua and Jamie Yaffa were sort of investors in the beginning, but later they started to call other investors. They used a quote-unquote phone room, online marketing, to try to convince other investors to buy the stocks in this company. They were able to raise the stock from 50 cents per share all the way to $2. And unsurprisingly, when the price rose all the way to $2, the Yaffa brothers dumped their stock, making millions of dollars, while other investors lost a bunch of money. Now, when we're dealing with securities fraud or other financial crimes, we're talking about Section 2B1.1 of the Federal Sentencing Guidelines. Now, the Federal Sentencing Guidelines you should be familiar with. We've discussed them many times, but before we've never focused on this particular section. 2B1.1 deals with financial crimes. And there you will see a table that shows loss, and depending on the loss, the higher it is, the higher your offense level. And the higher the offense level, the higher your exposure to prison time, because offense levels equals guideline sentence. The table at the back of the sentencing guidelines has 6 criminal history categories on top and 43 offense levels. The intersection of those have months in prison. Of course, the sentencing guidelines are not mandatory, they're just advisory. The judges will calculate your guidelines, and the judge can sentence you to whatever time is appropriate or justified, according to the judiciary. Now, of course, all the parties, probation, prosecution, and your defense attorney, will try to argue a certain guideline sentence to the judge, or below a guideline sentence. When we're dealing with financial crimes, the table shows loss to the victims. But in certain cases, it is extremely difficult to calculate the loss. For example, in this complex white-collar crime, how much money did the investors lose in this particular scheme? Well, the court said it was practically impossible for them to calculate. Instead, what they did is focused on the gain by the defendants. Relying on the evidence from trial, the district court combined the gains attributed to each brother with the actual loss established by the government to arrive at total loss amounts of $942,099 for Joshua and $607,996 for Jamie, based on the graduated table in the Sentencing Guidelines 2B1.1b1. The district court therefore applied a 14-level increase to each brother's offense level. After the 14-level enhancements were applied, Joshua's adjustment offense level was 21 and Jamie's was 19, resulting in a guideline range of 37 to 46 months for Joshua and 30 to 37 months for Jamie. The district court then varied downward from the brothers' guideline ranges and sentenced Joshua to 32 months of imprisonment and Jamie to 17 months. The Yaffas timely appealed. But why did the Yaffa brothers appeal? They said that the district court made an error during sentencing when looking at their gain while calculating the loss under the loss table in section 2B1.1. They said that this was not proper. And by the way, a 14-level increase is huge in federal court. Let me give you an example. If you have no criminal history and you're in the first criminal history category, and let's say your offense level is 10, you're looking at 6 to 12 months in prison. However, if there is a 14-level increase, bringing you up to offense level 24, all of a sudden you're looking at 51 to 63 months in prison. So the 14-level increase in my particular example exposes the person to nearly 4 extra years in prison. So 14 levels is a huge increase in federal court. However, the Ninth Circuit says that this increase was proper. The Ninth Circuit says in complex fraud cases, white-collar cases, when it is not possible or reasonably impossible to calculate the loss, like in this case, the commentary under 2B1.1 says that the courts can use gain associated with the defendants. And so, because the sentencing guidelines explicitly allow this, the court did not make an error. So I hope you enjoyed this video and you've learned something about generally fraud cases. You know a little bit about the statistics and where we're heading with this administration. You now understand how to calculate loss and that sometimes we look at the defendant's gain when we're dealing with complex fraud cases. Now that you've listened through this whole video and watched all of it, you know the law. Once you watch it, you must subscribe. So hit that subscribe button. If you're new here, especially, if you've already subscribed, make sure that you hit that bell notification button. So next time I post, you're first to know. If you're listening to the podcast version of this recording on Audible or Spotify, please give my podcast a 5-star rating. And finally, if you want to support this channel, consider going to lawstash.com and check out some of the merch, including the Do Not Arrest This Person t-shirts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Wednesday for another deep dive on another case.